right, I think we're good to go. All right, we're gonna jump in. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. Before we get started really quickly, we have a new feature on Zoom for interpretation. So down in the bottom of the screen, there should be a button that says interpretation. If you need Spanish interpretation, please click on that and select Spanish.
Si necesitan para español, hagan clic ahí en donde dice interpretación y van a escuchar toda la presentación en español.
Chicos, vengan. Póngame en español, venga yo. Sí, dice que hagan clic allí para en español.
Mira, Crisia, ahí donde está el mundo, hazle clic ahí y pon a tu mami en mute.
Okay.
All right, hopefully we were all able to get that, and we are going to keep it moving. So first of all, Happy New Year, everyone. I know we're almost halfway through January already, which is crazy, but good to see everybody. I hope you had a good end to 2020, and even though I'm sure it looked and felt a little bit different than usual, I hope you had a chance to celebrate and be with family over the holidays. So today, we want to spend some time talking about our Term 3 reopening plans. And specifically, we're hoping to clearly communicate both what our community told us that they need for reopening, what our planning process was for the reopening models that we have, and of course, what our plan is. And then we'll wrap up with some just the logistics of who and how we're going to be offering seats. And then, of course, at the end, we'll have a time for any questions that you have for me to field those. So first of all, to start with, I want to spend some time talking through the reopening survey data. So this was a survey that DCPS sent out. It was towards the end of November, early December, really trying to capture what individual school communities were hoping for and needed for Term 3 and reopening. So HD Cook had a great turnout here. We had a total of 295 families respond to the survey, which was about 77% of our overall community. So this is a really great number. That means a lot because it's helpful to know that we have a lot of people participate and that we are sort of hearing from our whole community in terms of what the hopes are and what's needed for Term 3 in terms of reopening. So thank you for participating in the survey and sharing your input here so that we can plan accordingly. It's much appreciated. On the survey, we were really trying to capture sort of three big buckets of things. One is we wanted to know what your preference was for Term 3, whether it's in person or virtual. The second thing is if you are interested in being in person, are you mostly interested in like the in-person learning model, which is sort of the classroom environment as we know it? Or were you interested in a care class, which is students remaining sort of in the virtual world, but they come to school to be supervised at the school to participate in the virtual learning? And then three is what is your preference if your teacher were to have to change? With staffing decisions and such, there are possibilities that teacher changes could happen with reopening, and wanted to hear if that would change your desire to come back in person if teacher changed. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes in the next few slides going over sort of what we saw in each of these three big buckets from the reopening survey. So first up was the question around, do you want to be virtual or do you want to be in person? So at HD Cook, of the 295 responses, 197 of our families indicated that they want to stay virtual. For a variety of reasons, and no one is right and no one is wrong, but these families have made the decision that they want to remain virtual through Term 3, and 88 families decided or indicated that they would like to return in person in some capacity. On the right-hand side of your screen, you can see these numbers broken down by each individual grade level of what families indicated. So as I said, the second big bucket item on the survey was around if you return in person, which in-person model do you prefer? So the three options were the in-person learning, again, which is sort of like traditional classroom as we know it. And then there's the care classroom, which is students are doing the virtual learning, but supervised in the school by a staff member. Or one of the options on the survey was either, doesn't really matter. And so you can see on your screen here that the majority of families who wanted to come back for in-person learning, 53, indicated that their preference is an in-person learning model. 4 families indicated that they prefer a care model, and 31 indicated that they would prefer, or sorry, don't have a preference of care or in-person learning, that either one would be okay with them, that just getting back in the building is a priority. Finally, the last item that's captured on the survey is around the possibility of a teacher change. So this is kind of phrased as, would you stay virtual if the teacher changed? Would you still consider in-person if teacher changed? Or would you come back in person no matter what? And so with this question, 29% of the 88 families that indicated coming back in person said that they would actually make the decision to stay virtual. That the relationship and the community that they built with their teacher is very important to them. And if it meant changing their teacher at this point of the year, that they would make the decision to just remain virtual. 39 indicated that they would still consider in-person learning, but not a definite yes and not a definite no. And then 17 families indicated that even if the teacher changed, they would still return for in-person learning. And so with all of this input and information, it really sort of gave us 2 clear pictures. One is that we have a small number of our whole school community that's really wanting in-person learning for term 3, and that's the in-person learning model or CARES. That's about 30% of our community is hoping to return in person in term 3. Secondly, is that maintaining your student's current teacher is a really high priority for families who would be returning for in-person or care. So of the families that said that they would come in person, 33% of them said they would remain virtual if the teacher changed, and 44% would consider staying virtual, which means that of the 88 families, 77% of those may not return for in-person at all if their teacher was to change. And so what this told us, what this told us is that for term 3 planning, it was our goal to come up with a plan that offered in-person opportunities for the 30% of families that wanted to, but try to do it in a way that students wouldn't have to change their teachers, whether they were going to be in person or virtual. And so in November, we put together what we call the Reopening Community Core, or RCC for short. And this team, the whole job of this team was to sit down and develop some priorities for reopening as a school community, and look closely at that reopening survey data and come up with a plan that meets our needs and the priorities that this team outlined. And so the Reopening Community Core was made up of parent representatives from pre-K through 5th grade. Both of our PTO co-presidents were on this team. Our Washington Teachers Union building representative was on the team. And we had teachers from each grade level band and department leads that participated in this collaborative planning process. And so when the team met and came together and thought through our priorities for reopening in term 3, we really nailed down 3 major priorities that we wanted to stick to for reopening. One is that we wanted to minimize disruption for all learners. So it was very evident with our discussions that it was important that as we think about reopening in term 3, that we maintain consistency, not just for kids that are coming for in-person, but also for the kids that would remain virtual. That we wanted to be very intentional about making sure that kids that chose to stay virtual and families that made the decision to stay virtual wouldn't have impacts of teacher changes and shuffling around because of that decision. So it was a priority for consistency for all in term 3 with whatever reopening model we choose. The second priority that we named is to make sure that we're prioritizing our highest need students first, and we'll talk about that process in a little bit. And then third, we wanted to make sure that we kept our class and group sizes small in the virtual setting. This again includes both students that are staying virtual and students that are in person, making sure that any staffing changes that we made for in-person didn't affect class sizes in the virtual setting that would make them higher than they need to be. So with all of this information from the reopening survey, and with naming these priorities from the reopening community core, and using some of the models and things that DCPS has given us, we have come up with our overall plan for reopening, which is this. And I'm going to go into more detail in the coming slides, but this is sort of the mile-high view of what we are going to be offering for term 3. So in pre-K 3 and pre-K 4, we'll be offering full-time in-person learning classrooms. In our kindergarten through 5th grade classes, we'll be offering care classrooms, 1 at each grade level. And then in our ELS and SLS self-contained classrooms, we'll be offering 1 full-time in-person learning classroom in each of those grades as well. So specifically for our pre-K reopening plan, in pre-K 3, we are planning to have 1 full-time in-person classroom. Full-time means that it runs from roughly 8:45 to roughly 3 o'clock. We are going to have staggered arrival and dismissal times, and I'll get into that in a moment. Again, we're still mile high here. But also that is worth noting that you're going to hear me say a few times starting now, is that all in-person learning will only run on Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. There will be no in-person learning at HD Cook on Wednesdays. And again, I'll get into the details here, but this allows us to do our deep cleaning in the in-person spaces. For our pre-K 3 families, the in-person teacher might change. So Ms. J. Moore is going to be the in-person teacher for pre-K 3. So if she's currently your teacher and you decide to come in person, if you're offered a seat, your teacher will stay the same. However, if you're in Missy Bunningway's class, obviously this means that if you decide to come in person, that you might end up with a different in-person teacher. In pre-K 4, right now, we're planning to open 1 full-time in-person classroom, again, running the same time frame as the pre-K 3 room, roughly 8:45 to roughly 3 o'clock. But again, that's only on Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. Again, no in-person opportunities are happening on Wednesdays. For pre-K 4, the in-person teacher will change. We are making some staffing moves, and we are going to have Miss Larenman, who has been at HD Cook for quite a few years and is excellent with our pre-K 4-year-olds. And she is going to be the lead teacher in this classroom for the full-time pre-K 4 room. We are possibly opening additional part-time classes in mid-February for pre-K 4. We're going to stagger these start times for the pre-K 4 classes. And by part-time, what we mean is that this is going to be a 2-day-a-week opportunity so that the pre-K 4 teachers can still continue their virtual caseload, but also have a caseload of students that are in person. This is going to completely depend on demand as February unrolls, and once we get this full-time in-person learning classroom up and running first. In our kindergarten through 5th grade rooms, our plan is we are opening a care class in each grade with in-person learning support. So as a reminder, the care classrooms are where students come into the building, they continue their virtual learning as they are, their teacher stays the same, their schedule stays the same, everything stays the same except for where they're participating in their virtual learning. So they'll be in a classroom with a care facilitator, and that person that's supervising the room, it might be an HD Cook staff member, it might be a hired contractor, or it might be a central office employee. And we'll share those staffing items here in the coming days. And then additionally, in our care model, teachers are going to be coming in person to offer additional in-person support to the students that are participating in the care classrooms. So this means that for roughly an hour a day, give or take, depending on the, sorry, I'm very distracted as you can see, depending on the grade level, but for about an hour a day, your current teacher will be doing cycles of time that they're reporting for in-person support to do small groups with students in person. So this is not every teacher every day. It'll be one teacher from the grade level that's there to support with this. but we have a schedule built out where teachers are going to be able to provide the additional in-person support for the kids that are participating in the CARE classroom as well. Finally, our self-contained, our ELS and SLS classes, we're opening both classes at 50% capacity. So that's either 5 students or 6 students, depending on which class you're talking about. The teachers are going to stay the same, no staffing changes there. And these classes will actually simulcast. So students will remain virtual and we'll have additional small group times virtually as well for those students. Sorry, give me a second off. All right, so putting it all together, here is sort of a snapshot of what we're offering, what was indicated in the survey, as well as what was indicated in the survey if the teacher was to change. So as you can see, if you look at these numbers, in almost every grade, we're offering enough seats based on what demand was. And still trying to keep teachers the same. That was really the basis of our decision to try to keep the CARE classrooms with this additional in-person support in K through 5, is to try to make sure that we're keeping that consistency for all, both virtual and in person. And I know I'm providing a lot of information here. So as questions are coming up, please feel free to go ahead and type them into the chat. We do have a question and answer time at the end. I'm not going to answer them now. But we will obviously circle back to them and I'll answer those as they come up. So just a few items around the schedule. So all in-person learning opportunities are scheduled at this point to begin on February 1st. And again, the in-person and CARE classes, those are both going to be operating 4 days a week, Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays. For any in-person opportunity, it is not happening on Wednesdays. Again, this is so we can do our deep cleaning of the spaces that are in person. As I said, we're going to have some staggered arrival and dismissal times to make sure that we're being very intentional about the amount of people in designated spaces. And then in terms of the daily schedule for students, they will obviously, when they come to the building, they'll have breakfast, they'll have lunch, and a recess time built into their day to try to make it as much like the normal school day as possible. All right, few items around safety and operations. So at the building, right now, we sort of have 5 main mitigation efforts that we have to try to stop the spread at HD Cook of COVID. One is the enhanced air filtration in all of our learning spaces. So in October, our overall HVAC system received an enhancement and upgraded air filters. But additionally, we have HEPA grade air filters in every learning space. And these are the ones that also have the added UV light. So these are supposed to be extremely effective at circulating and cleaning the air. Second is that we require mask wearing for anyone, students, staff, and visitors in the building at all times. Third is our social distancing in and out of learning spaces. At all times during the day, students and staff should remain 6 feet apart. And then for our fourth big thing is that we have our daily health screening. So when students show up, they get asked a series of questions. You'll also be turning in a paper that's sort of signing off on the indicating that your student is in good health. And then of course, we're going to do temperature checks at the door as well. And then last, we have the podding or cohorts of students. So when a student is in the building, at no time during the day would they have any contact with a student in a different class or a different cohort. We've built a schedule to ensure that there's no sort of crossing of the cohorts or pods of kids. So for example, if you have a first grader and they're in a first grade care room, the other 10 kids that are in that class are the only 10 kids that they'll be in contact with during the day. And of course, this is to make sure that we contain any level of positivity that might happen in the building. Additionally, that's sort of captured under this is that DCPS is currently offering COVID testing. So there's two testing strategies for students. One is asymptomatic testing. So all students that are participating in in-person learning receive a COVID test every 10 days at the school. So this is during the regular school day. Each class comes to the gym at a designated time, and every student receives a test. You obviously give permission for this, and you're always able to opt out if this is not a service that you choose to participate in. Secondly, is symptomatic testing for students. So if a student was to develop symptoms during the day, let's say they show up to school perfectly healthy, but at 10 o'clock in the morning, they develop a fever, we are able to give them a rapid COVID test by the school nurse that would then indicate sort of our next steps based on what that rapid test would result. At any time, if we give a rapid test, regardless if that test comes out positive or negative, we are still strongly encouraging you to go to one of the other DC Health testing sites to get an additional PCR test because of the there's a higher number of false negatives with the rapid test. All right, a few more operations and logistical things, sorry. As I said, we'll have staggered arrival and dismissal by grade level. And I should be clear that we're keeping this very mile high right now because we are gonna have additional town halls and meet and greets for those families that do decide to accept a seat. That'll get into the finer details of like the exact times that these things are happening. But just want to share these things that we're doing so to make sure that we're all on the same page to help inform you if you are offered a seat in your decision. So again, we'll have the staggered arrival and dismissal times. The idea here is to manage the amount of people that we have in one single space at a time. At arrival, we're going to utilize different entrances for each different grade level, again, to make sure that we're not having a lot of people in one space at one time. There will be no visitors allowed in the building unless you schedule a meeting ahead of time. This is just, again, to make sure that we're really able to limit the amount of people that could come in contact with anyone at any given time. And by scheduling these things ahead of time, we can make sure that we just only have one, maybe two visitors in the building at a time to make sure that we're being intentional there. And then, as I said, daily health screenings at arrival. So you sign a little form saying that you've asked a series of questions and you've done like sort of a health screening with your student. They get their temperature taken at the door, and then our nurses that are here full time now, they will ask an additional series of questions to either you or your student when you arrive to make sure that you are in good health. Finally, logistically, are the immunizations. So it's important that any person that's going to be coming for term 3 is up to date on their immunizations and that the health records have been submitted to the school. We can only hold the seat for 5 days if your student does not have updated immunizations. So starting February 1st, let's say right now you're not totally up to date and you haven't submitted your health records. Basically, you're going to have until February 5th to get all of that updated into us because we can only hold that seat for 5 days from when the classroom opens. So if this is something that you know that you might be interested in, please make sure that you get those up to date and you're ready to go with your health forms. All right, lastly, as we sort of land this plane is the student selection process. So what has happened is the central office is going to run a lottery, and that lottery gives preference to 4 sort of priority groups. One is it gives a preference to students who accepted an in-person learning seat for term 2 by November 4th. So those families that we called way back in November when we thought we were opening in term 2, if you indicated and accepted by November 4th that you were going to take the seat, then you would receive a preference in this lottery to be towards the top. Additionally, students who are currently experiencing homelessness are given a preference. Students who are English language learners or special education are given a preference. And then students considered to be at risk are given a preference in the lottery and the ranking of how we're going to offer these to students. Additionally, the school does and is able to submit appeals for rankings on waitlist. So as we look at sort of how the waitlist came out, if we know that there's a particular student that we know would just really benefit from being in this in-person opportunity, we can submit an appeal to the superintendent who can either approve or deny moving a student up in the wait list to ensure that they get offered a seat. And then finally, the school will begin making calls to offer the in-person opportunity seats. And so we plan to begin making those calls on Wednesday of this week on the 13th. So the lottery was out on Friday, and we are working on appeals now, and hopefully we'll be ready to start making calls on Wednesday to begin offering these in-person seats for February 1st. So next steps for reopening. So right now on your end, there is no immediate action that you need to take. One ask that we have, if you are here right now, or if you're listening to this recorded, is please be thinking about whether or not you're going to accept a seat if we call you with an offer. We learned in term 2 when we thought we were reopening that this process can get really bogged down with the time frame that you have to make a decision. And so it's super helpful on our end to be able to plan accordingly and really be ready if we can do this as fast as possible. So with that, please be ready with an answer if we were to call you. And I know that there's a lot of probably still questions. And so, I'm asking you to have an answer. So if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out between now and whenever. Just keep the questions coming. We'll be sure to respond really quickly because I know it's important to have those questions answered so that you're able to make an informed decision. And then, so again, we're going to start making calls on Wednesday. And then, as I said, if you do accept a seat, if you're offered a seat, we'll be having additional town halls and grade level meetings to get more in-depth details on the routines and procedures around reopening for term 3. And that leads us to our Q&A. So